Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Nasma Abdul Mohsin and this is Maldives Today. State of emergency has been declared in the Maldives in the government's efforts to retake control of the country following an alleged coup attempt. This has directed a spotlight on our nation's political situation. To give us more information about the issue, we have with us tonight Jeffrey Salim Wahid, Deputy Permanent Representative at the UN Mission in Geneva. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Nasma. It's a pleasure to be here.
At this critical juncture, the most frequently asked question by the international community is whether the declaration of state of emergency is justified.
It absolutely is, but you really do have to figure out what led to us calling a state of emergency in the first place. All of this was really instigated by the ruling of the Supreme Court on the 1st of February. Now, it did two things. It did come up with a number of political judgments, but outside of that, it also consolidated complete judicial authority into the Supreme Court itself. It took away the power of the Judicial Services Commission to do its job, and the JSC is a constitutionally mandated, independent institution of horizontal accountability that's only purpose is to regulate the judiciary. Now, when it does this, when the Supreme Court did this, it creates a constitutional crisis in our country. It creates a place where we're unable to exercise the checks and balances that are enshrined in the Constitution. And that's why you call it a constitutional crisis. Now, when we had emerging evidence come forward, credible evidence appear that there's been massive amounts of bribery, that the judiciary itself has been compromised, that the ability for us to have verdicts and the independence of the judicial court as the highest court in the land has been completely subverted, then how do you deal with that? You know, the only way for us to be able to do this, to have a credible, reasonable, independent investigation by the police, is to ensure that those institutions that are being investigated can't interfere with the investigation. And even during the state of emergency, the right to a fair trial remains. The right to counsel remains. The right to a free press, as we see from most of the channels in the Maldives, remains. But what we need to do is ensure that the investigation that's taking place is credible, is independent. And if there is we now know that there's millions of dollars being spent on subverting the judiciary. We have to ensure that the judiciary doesn't go forward with those kinds of impediments. We have to make sure that they remain independent, that once the state of emergency is withdrawn, that we have a balance of power again, that the Constitution is maintained, that there is a separation of powers in the country.
Well, during this whole episode, we saw India and China being portrayed as partners to rival sides of the political dialogue in Maldives. They've been pitted against each other in media, in social media. However, the government maintains that there is no such involvement from either side. And today we saw the Minister of Defense urge politicians to refrain from narratives that could compromise the existing ties between Maldives and India. First of all, how has this, if at any level, affected bilateral relations between India and Maldives?
So both the Indian and the Chinese governments want to be a partner to the people of Maldives. They're always going to work with our government. They're always going to work with our people. They're going to be some of our closest development partners. Now, when it comes to India especially, the Maldives continues to have an India-first policy. India is one of these countries that will always be an all-weather friend. You know, whether we have stormy clouds or clear sunny days, they're always going to be there for us. And over the course of our 52 years of independence, they've always been a consistent and valuable partner. And all of our colleagues in the Indian missions abroad and the envoys that they have here all recognize the value of that friendship.
Well, we have heard talk about military intervention as well. We have heard unjustified claims that certain governments shall send in troops to uphold the rule of law in Maldives. A number of people are of the opinion that such claims are absurd. How much of a possibility is military intervention under these circumstances? We know that the times have changed. This is not the time of colonization and such. How much of a possibility is that?
Zero possibility. I have to be counted among the people who consider it absurd. Now, this is my 7th year in the Foreign Service. I've met plenty of Indian diplomats, Indian ambassadors, and their policies are clear. They have been non-interventionist for 70 years of their foreign policy. It's clear in their policies in the non-aligned movement. It's clear in our entire 52 years of our relationship. They're not going to intervene through military means or other means. They remain a country that is dedicated to working with others. Intervention is simply not going to happen.
Well, we are a country that banks on foreign investment and foreign partnerships for trade and development. How confident is the government that the political situation in the country currently will not have an adverse effect on the country's economy and foreign investment partnerships?
We've seen, over the course of our democratic consolidation, since the first democratic election in 2008, we've seen quite a bit of turmoil, for our country. And in spite of all the political hardships that we've had, the Maldives has always been a very stable place. Most of the consulting firms that they hire will tell them very clearly, if you go into the Maldives, your investments will be protected. You are guaranteed a decent return in a very short amount of time. We happen to in the entire region, actually.
Well, one of the important problems that have been dug up during this deep-rooted corruption
can only be curbed by enforcing the laws that we have already. Corruption is not something that's new to the Maldives. It's not new to most countries, but the determination to actually prosecute people who are guilty of corruption, to enforce the laws that a country has, that's what's important. And we've seen a massive amount of corruption in our administration, under past administrations. What we have to do is make sure that going forward, we use this momentum to make sure that no one can continue with these corrupt acts again. We need to make sure that there is transparency, that the independent institutions that we have continue to do their jobs, continue to expose places. No excuse.
One of the issues that have surfaced, especially in media, especially something that has is...
I have absolute faith. And I'm sure anyone who's in the military, and sons, brothers, apologies, and they take that or the other. Hate that we see in our society is really corrosive. And that's the purpose of a lot of this rhetoric, of the sensationalist rhetoric, the sensationalist arguments that people make saying that, compromised, intervention's going to... And yet it is the state of affairs. This is why the government has tried to bring people together. This is why we've even put out recently, day before yesterday, we asked for all parties to come together. Spectrum.
Speaking about the all-party talks, how much of a possibility do you think it is?
The politics of Maldives is the politics of personalities. It depends on the will of our political leaders. If they're willing to come and sit down, if they're willing to talk without preconditions, if there is no dialogue, how are things ever going to get better? The way in which we exist, the way in which political parties exist, is on opposite sides, opposite poles of the political spectrum. And unless people are willing to talk, then we're not going to move forward at all.
Now more than ever, we see parallels drawn between the current incident and that of February 7, 2012. They say that February 7th, the incident had set a dangerous precedent that no elected president can complete his term in office. How do we reverse this way of thinking? How do we ensure that this does not, in fact, become a precedent, as they say?
Again, that's the result of politics of polarization. On February 7th and the 23 days of protests leading up to it was the result of the former President Nasheed refusing to listen to anyone around. He essentially kidnapped a judge, because the judge was releasing people who went on TV and spoke against him. Now, forget the fact that Dr. Jamil, our former vice president, and Nasheed are on the same side today. We forget that. But we still have to recognize that the context between today and that period is very different. It's not a judge who's just releasing people who you don't like. In this instance, we have millions of dollars being spent to subvert an entire institution, an entire branch of our government. The level is incomparable. The context matters. The context today and how different it is to what's happened in the past, it matters. The only way for us to be able to move forward from these dramatic instances is for people to try and work together to make sure that when we go into this election, that'll happen later this year, that we are talking, that we ensure a free and open space. And people have to be willing to do that. Protesting every day is not the way. Making sure that we can't even hold an election is not the way. We will hold an election. People will be able to compete. People who haven't committed crimes.
Well, more often than not, the results of such incidents is how do I say, irreversible damage to the social fabric of the country. How do we recover from incidents like this?
Time. It's only going to be over time, showing that we can have dialogue, showing that we can be a responsible government, that we can be a responsible society. Many of the accusations that are made are so corrosive. They hit people so deep. That it takes a lot. It takes a lot to get over. Because the way that we operate today, it's the way that you polarize people is inspiring hate in them. And hate is one of the most difficult things to let go of. There's no way for us to work together in this small community unless we're able to let go of some of that hate, that virulent anger that we try to espouse in each other.
Okay. Thank you very much for sparing time from your busy schedule to be with us. And this is Nasma Abdul Mohsin signing off, hoping to see you again to discuss yet another issue of national importance. Thank you for watching. Have a pleasant night.